remember that Friday like a bruise you can't stop pressing. The sky was an indifferent gray, the kind that made the city feel like it had lost its pulse. I had just come from the little bakery on 7th, Nathan's favorite place. I stood in line for 20 minutes for that stupid almond croissant he always said reminded him of Paris. I even tied the box with a gold ribbon, slipping the photo frame inside like a secret gift. It was a picture of us on our 10th anniversary in Santorini. We looked sun-kissed and drunk on each other. I'd spent half an hour choosing the right frame, brushed bronze with a sea glass border, soft and warm like that night. I remember thinking, this will make him smile. He's been so stressed lately. The security guard at the front desk recognized me and waved me through. I didn't call ahead. He always said he loved surprises. The elevator felt slower than usual, its lights flickering as if hesitating. My heart beat with quiet excitement. I rehearsed a line or two in my head, something teasing like, "Guess who brought breakfast and nostalgia?" I pushed open the glass door to his office suite gently, careful not to spill the coffee or crush the box. That's when I heard her laugh. It wasn't the kind of laugh that warms a room. It was sharp, syrupy, a performance. I paused just outside the doorway. His office door was half open, and through the sliver I saw her, perched on the edge of his desk like a glossy ornament. She wore a tight red dress, the kind you don't wear to an office unless you're dressing for someone, not something. She was holding our picture. "This is the woman he married?" She snorted. "No offense, but wow!" The word wow hit like glass shattering in my ears. Nathan's voice followed, low and amused. It was a different time. A different time. Like I was some outdated wallpaper he hadn't gotten around to, tearing down. I didn't breathe. My hands shook, the pastry box crinkling softly in my grip. I looked down and realized the warmth of the coffee had seeped into the cardboard. It had left a stain, a spreading, blooming stain. She laughed again, and this time it hit deeper. There was nothing accidental about it. It was the laugh of someone who already believed she'd won. And Nathan didn't correct her. He didn't say, "She's beautiful." He didn't say, "She's the love of my life." He didn't even say, "That's my wife." He said nothing, just chuckled, shrugged, as if my existence were an embarrassing footnote. I could still smell her perfume in the hallway. Sweet, overwhelming, too loud for that small space. It was roses, yes, but the fake kind. The kind that clung to skin and never really smelled like anything alive. I stepped back before they could see me. I left the box on the windowsill by reception and walked out without a sound. The world outside had shifted. The sky seemed darker. My own reflection in the glass lobby doors looked like a stranger, lips pale, eyes vacant. I touched my wedding ring without thinking, twisting it slowly. It felt tight. It felt wrong. Like I had stolen it from someone. Elsa's hand. That was the moment the glass cracked. Not a scream. Not a fight. Just silence so loud it echoed inside me. I got in my car and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. My fingers still smelled like almond sugar and espresso. My lips trembled, but no tears came. Not yet. The frame. It had taken me hours to pick that frame. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always come like a storm. Sometimes it arrives like a whisper behind a door, a laugh that wasn't meant for your ears, a shrug that means you were never really seen. I drove home on autopilot, each red light a slap. My hands didn't stop shaking until I walked into his kitchen and set the spare coffee cup down on the counter. It sat there untouched for days. The ring came off that night. I placed it in the drawer beside the spoons. It was a simple moment. No confrontation, no screaming. But it changed everything. In that quiet, I died a little. And somewhere, something else began to wake up. I met Nathan at a gallery opening the year I turned 24. I'd just finished a series of large-scale acrylics that no one bought but everyone complimented. I still wore paint beneath my fingernails like jewelry. My world was color, mess, impulse. His was order, crisp cuffs, clean lines, the kind of cologne that lingered just long enough to be remembered. He liked that I was an artist, said I reminded him of someone he used to be. I didn't quite know what that meant at the time, but it sounded poetic, mysterious. He was 10 years older. That felt important. Grown, grounded. While I was still floating between dreams and rent, payments, he had a plan, a 5-year goal, a startup already climbing. He made me feel chosen. Like I was something rare he'd reached down to pick from the crowd. We moved in together quickly, his idea, but I didn't resist. He said we were building something real. I liked the word build. It sounded strong. I didn't notice at the time that everything we built began with me letting go of something I loved. I gave up my studio to make room for his home office. Just until we get the company off the ground, he said. You can paint in the garage, babe. You said you like natural light. I nodded, smiled. Natural light, yes. But the garage always smelled like gasoline and dust, and the concrete floor bit into my knees. I stopped painting after a month. Instead, I started managing things, groceries, utilities, vendors for his office furniture. I became good at picking, colors for other people's spaces, coordinating calendars, proofreading investor pitches. He called me his magic, his secret weapon. He'd touch the small of my back at business events and say, "She's the reason I'm still standing." I'd beam. I wore those words like pearls. Precious, but always kept just tight enough around the throat. Friends started drifting. And at first I thought it was the usual growing apart. Then I realized I had stopped showing up. I was always tired. Always helping Nathan. My texts became shorter, more distant. One-word replies. Eventually, the invitations stopped coming. My mother, sharp-eyed, never one for sugarcoating, once asked me during a rare visit, "Why does he always talk over you, sweetheart? Doesn't he want to hear what you think?" I laughed it off. "He's just passionate, Mom. You know how entrepreneurs are." She gave me a look that pierced something quiet in me. Passion shouldn't silence you. But I silenced that thought, swallowed it down with a polite smile and another list of errands. The house became a monument to him. I picked the tile for the bathroom renovation, the backsplash for the kitchen. Every rug, every lamp, every pillow, my touch, my taste. But always filtered through what would impress clients or photograph well for the company blog. He praised my choices to guests. "She's got such an eye," he'd say, not realizing the irony, that I'd once used that eye to capture fire on canvas. Now it was relegated to curtain swatches and charger plates. I kept the canvases, though. Stored them in the attic behind the Christmas bins. Sometimes I'd sneak up there just to touch them. The ridges of dried paint felt like old skin. I'd run my fingers across them and wonder if the girl who made them still existed somewhere beneath all the smoothing out. Nathan changed too. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe I just started noticing. He grew colder in private, more performative, in public. He stopped asking about my day, stopped making coffee for 2. When I asked if he liked the new duvet I bought, he didn't even look up from his laptop. I don't care about that stuff. You know I trust your taste. Trust. That word. He trusted me with the things that didn't matter. The aesthetics. The margins. But not the things that required space, voice, presence. He began staying late at work. "Meetings," he said. I believed him. Or maybe I just chose not to dig. I didn't want to be the insecure wife. The paranoid burden. I told myself we were in a season, a hard chapter. That marriages have quiet years, dry years, that it was noble to wait, to water something that didn't bloom right away. But deep down, I felt the drought. There was a moment. I'll never forget it, when I burned dinner by accident. I'd been distracted, on the phone with a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. When Nathan got home, he barely looked at me, just wrinkled his nose and said, "Seriously? What did you do? All day?" I laughed, trying to make light of it. Got lost in a conversation, burned the chicken. "Let's order in?" He sighed. "Of course. You had one thing to do." I said nothing, just nodded. Inside, something quieted, like a light going out in a room no one visited anymore. I held on to his compliments like breadcrumbs, even as they grew stale. He once called my sacrifices inspirational during a company interview. Said she gave up her art to help me build this dream. The interviewer asked if I missed painting. Nathan answered for me. "She's fulfilled in other ways." I smiled through the rest of the dinner. I even shook hands and posed for photos. But I cried in the bathroom stall before we left. Fulfilled. As if I were a pie dish or a quota. Looking back now, I wonder if he ever really knew me. Or if I was just a canvas, blank, adaptable, useful. I let him sketch his dreams onto me, layer by layer, until mine faded beneath the primer. This wasn't just about cheating. It was about slow erosion. 1,000 tiny choices that told me I mattered less. That my voice was optional. That my dreams could wait. But they never came back. By the time I found the woman in red perched on his desk, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was hollowed out. And I had built the very walls that trapped me. After the office incident, I didn't cry. Not right away. I went home, placed the pastry box untouched on the counter, and stood in the silence of our kitchen, marble countertops gleaming under artificial light, the smell of rosemary and lemon, still clinging to the air from the chicken I had cooked the night before. It had always felt like my sanctuary. But that day, it became something else. A stage, a facade, polished grief. I cleaned. Not to make things better, but to pretend they were still whole. I wiped down the counters twice, scrubbed the stovetop until my knuckles reddened, reorganized the pantry by label color. I convinced myself that if everything sparkled, then maybe I could keep from falling apart. Nathan came home late that evening. I didn't ask why. He didn't offer. He kissed the top of my head absently, like someone patting a pet, then disappeared upstairs. With his phone still glued to his ear, I stood at the sink, the warmth of his gesture gone before it registered. The next morning, I noticed the photo frame was missing. The one I'd brought to his office, the picture of us in Santorini 10 years ago. I'd picked it out carefully. A brass frame shaped like olive branches, the same ones that had crowned our heads when we exchanged vows beneath the Greek sun. I'd printed the photo on matte paper because he hated glare. I even wrote a note on the back in gold ink. "Here's to the roots we planted. May they still bloom." I found it 3 days later, in the kitchen trash bin, buried beneath a takeout container and an empty bottle of his protein shake. The glass was cracked diagonally across our faces. The photo torn, the edges soggy with something sticky and sweet. I pulled it out like a mourner handling bone fragments. My hands trembled. The ink on my note had bled into gold blurs. When he walked in, I held it up. My voice barely made it past my lips. "Why?" He barely glanced at it. It was cracked. "It wasn't when I gave it to you." He sighed, irritated. "Jesus, Claire. Do we really need to do this right now?" "Do what?" "This dramatic thing. You're acting like a broken picture means something." It does to me. That's when he really looked at me. And it wasn't anger. It wasn't guilt. It was boredom. "You've let yourself go," he said quietly, like it was a favor to finally say it out loud. "We're not the same anymore. You're always in sweats. You barely do your hair. I can't remember the last time you touched me without sighing." I opened my mouth, but no sound came. It felt like every nerve in my body was on fire and frozen at the same time. He added, "I've tried to make this work, but I need someone who sees me, not just someone who's always looking backward." I laughed. It was sharp and wrong. "You mean someone who strokes your ego, who tells you you're still that hungry man building an empire, instead of the one tearing down his own wife." His eyes narrowed. "You've always been so fragile, Claire. You think everything's about feelings, about moments. Life doesn't work like that. Grow up." I packed a bag that night, threw in jeans, a few shirts, underwear. I didn't even grab my toothbrush. I just needed to not be under the same roof with that voice, that indifference. Drove for hours with no direction. The city blurred past me, neon signs, shuttered shops, lonely figures on park benches. I ended up at a 24-hour diner off the highway, sat in a corner booth and ordered coffee I didn't drink. I stared at my phone, not sure who to call. Not even sure if I wanted to call anyone. I was alone. But the truth was, I'd been alone for a long time. The next morning, I returned home like a ghost. I told myself I'd left to make a point. But I knew the truth. I had nowhere else to go. I started sleeping in the guest room. We didn't talk about it. That was the most damning part. How normal the silence became. Like we were just roommates passing in a shared space. Sometimes I heard him laughing in the main bedroom, low and warm, the kind of laugh he hadn't shared with me in years. The kind of laugh that used to echo across our kitchen when we danced barefoot after dinner. One afternoon, a bill arrived. I almost didn't open it. I rarely did. Nathan handled all the finances, but it was addressed to me. Inside was a credit card statement, my name on the top. Charges I didn't recognize. A 4-night stay at the St. Eleonora Hotel, luxury suites, known for their skyline tubs and velvet robes. A diamond bracelet from a boutique jeweler in Soho. A private dinner for 2 on a rooftop restaurant I'd only seen in bridal magazines. I flipped page after page, each line a punch to the chest. The total, $7,193.42. I had never worn that bracelet. I had never soaked in that tub. That dinner wasn't mine. I dropped the paper, sank to the floor, and curled into myself like a burned photograph. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I was a woman-shaped ruin, and yet, beneath the rubble, something stirred. A pulse, a whisper. "You are not this." It didn't roar. It didn't scream. It was a flicker. But I felt it, like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. I crawled to the mirror in the hallway, the one he passed every morning without looking. I saw her, the woman I had become. Hollow-eyed, shoulders hunched, lips pressed so tightly they were pale. My hair was a mess. My sweatshirt had paint stains from a canvas I never finished. I looked like someone who had given up. But my eyes, they hadn't given up. They looked back at me with a question. "Are you going to let this be your ending?" I sat there for a long time, staring, feeling, remembering. And then I did something I hadn't done in months. I climbed into the attic, found the canvases, brushed the dust from their edges. They smelled like turpentine and old hope. I pulled one out, set it on the easel I'd almost thrown out. I didn't know what I would paint. I didn't even pick up a brush, but I stood in front of it, still, awake, ready. He may have thrown away our photo, but I still had the frame, and I would fill it again. I left at 4:12 a.m., the hour when the world feels ghost-like and forgiving. The house was silent, but not in a peaceful way, more like the silence that settles in a graveyard after the mourners leave. I didn't slam doors. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just wrote a note and set it on the marble kitchen counter, beside a single coffee mug he never remembered to rinse. Don't call me. I need to remember who I was before you. The ring. The one he placed on my finger with. Trembling hands and promises of forever, I slipped into the stainless steel sink. It landed with a soft clink that felt louder than thunder. I didn't watch it roll. I didn't say goodbye. I drove with no destination, just forward. Through the hushed back roads, past sleeping towns, until the sun began to rise in streaks of pale gold and rose across the horizon. With every mile, something inside me loosened. Grief has its own weather system, and in those first hours, mine was fog. Thick, disorienting, but slowly lifting. The pain didn't vanish. It curled beside me in the passenger seat like an unwanted pet. But at least it wasn't shouting anymore. It had quieted into a dull ache, the kind that teaches you how to breathe around it. I ended up 3 hours south, on a coastline I hadn't visited since my early 20s. Maddie, an old friend from college who'd once painted murals with me, on dorm walls and shared heartbreaks over cheap wine, had texted months ago to say her guest house was empty if I ever needed a break. I don't think she expected me to take her up on it, especially not without warning. But when I pulled into her gravel driveway, she opened the door in pajamas, her dark curls tangled, eyes wide with sleep and concern. "Jesus, Sarah, that's all," she said. Then she hugged me so tightly I thought my bones might finally remember how to hold themselves up. The guest house was small, a single-story cottage tucked behind her home. The windows stuck, the floorboards creaked, and everything smelled like eucalyptus and salt. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have his cologne clinging to the curtains. It didn't have the echo of slammed doors or silence heavy with resentment. It didn't have him. I slept for the first 3 days. Truly slept. Not that restless, heart-thudding doze I'd grown used to beside Nathan, always anticipating the flicker of his phone or the way he turned his back to me without a word. Here, wrapped in mismatched sheets and ocean air, I drifted, in and out of dreams that didn't hurt. But grief is greedy. It doesn't care about soft beds or borrowed peace. It followed me to the grocery store, ambushed me in the produce aisle where the oranges smelled too much like our honeymoon in Seville. I cried over avocados, over spilled milk, over a child calling for her mother in a tone that sounded too much like hope. I started walking, aimlessly at first, down to the beach, through streets where nobody knew me. I watched dogs chase waves. I listened to wind chimes on porches. I let the sun freckle my skin. Most days I still felt like a ghost wearing a woman's shape, but there were moments, tiny ones, when I could feel my blood stirring. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, I found my old sketchbook buried under a pile of clothes in the trunk of my car. I had packed in such a frenzy that I didn't remember putting it there. The leather cover was worn, the pages slightly warped from time. But my name was still there on the inside flap, written in looping letters I barely recognized. I stared at it for hours, unsure if I had the right to touch that version of me again, the one who saw beauty in shadows and meaning in colors. But my fingers itched. That night, I lit a candle, curled up on the guest house couch, and began to draw. At first, it was nothing, just lines, circles, scribbles. Then came eyes, a woman's hands, a broken frame, a wilted rose. I didn't mean for them to appear, but they arrived, bleeding from my mind onto the page. My hands shook. I cried without understanding why. But when I finished, something had shifted. A single breath deeper than the ones before. Days blurred into each other. I drew every morning now. At the small breakfast table, in cafes, on the porch where the breeze carried the scent of seaweed and possibility. The world was still cracked, but color had begun seeping in through the fractures. One morning, While sketching a pair of dancing shadows in a coastal cafe, a man in a corduroy blazer stopped at my table. He was older, glasses perched on his head, carrying a coffee that had long gone cold. "I don't mean to interrupt," he said gently, "but your lines, they ache in the best way. May I sit?" His name was Leo. He owned a small gallery too, streets over, and asked if I had more work. I didn't, not really, just sketchbook pages and half-torn sheets. But he insisted on seeing them, flipping through like he was reading a journal. "These belong on walls," he said. "In frames, not sketchbooks." I almost laughed. The last frame I touched held a photo Nathan threw away. But Leo's eyes were kind, and I didn't feel like an imposter when he looked at my drawings. A month later, 3 of my pieces hung in the back room of his gallery during a community exhibit. Nothing fancy, no champagne or critics, just neighbors, strangers. A teenage girl who stared at one of my pieces for a long time and said, "I feel this." That meant more than applause ever could. I picked up a part-time job at the local art center, teaching a group of children on Wednesday afternoons. Their hands were sticky with glue and imagination. They didn't know anything about me, about the woman-shaped ruin I'd been, but they laughed at my jokes and called me Miss Sarah like I mattered. One little boy, Milo, drew nothing but suns. When I asked him why, he shrugged and said, "Because they always come back." I think I smiled for real that day, for real that art didn't save me. At first, it just sat there, blank pages, still canvases, dry brushes, but it waited, quietly, like the sea just before dawn. It began with a single line, then a curl of hair, a trembling mouth, hands clutched in prayer, or grief. I couldn't tell which. I sketched her in charcoal first. A faceless woman wrapped in red. I didn't realize until weeks later that she was me. The woman I used to be had dissolved somewhere between the torn photograph and the shattered picture frame, but the woman I was becoming emerged through every stroke of my brush. Wounded, yes, but rising. Some paintings still trembled with memory. Some screamed. Others whispered. But all of them told the truth. I named the piece "The Woman in Red." She was crouched in the center of the canvas, wrapped in that same crimson scarf I'd once worn on a windy night in Venice with Nathan, long before the silences grew sharp. In the painting, the scarf flared like fire behind her, a symbol of everything she'd shed and everything she carried. When I hung it as the centerpiece of my first community gallery show, people paused. Some stared, some shifted uncomfortably. One woman, mid-40s, silver streak in her braid, reached out and touched my hand. "That was me too," she whispered. I think that's when I truly returned to my own skin. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was being seen, understood. Weeks before the show, I'd reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. David Liu, an old college friend who'd gone on to become a white-collar crime attorney in the city. We weren't especially close, but he remembered me. His voice was cautious at first, then kind. "I don't want to cause trouble," I said. "I just need to know the truth." I'd already gathered some pieces myself. Nathan had been careless, or maybe arrogant. Either way, his email account, linked to a shared cloud folder he'd forgotten, was a trove of information. Photos, bookings, receipts, a duplicate credit card under both our names but used exclusively for someone else. When David reviewed the files I sent, he called me that same night. "This isn't just infidelity," he said. "This is corporate fraud." He guided me, quietly, discreetly. We documented timelines, matched transactions, located internal communications between Nathan and her. And then, as if fate had grown tired of secrets, a gift. Security footage from a building maintenance log. It showed them, Nathan and the assistant he'd once claimed was just a kid fresh out of college, in his office after hours, not working, the same desk where he'd once framed my photo, the same desk where he'd sighed and told me I was just a pretty face who didn't understand business. I saved the video file onto a silver flash drive and locked it in a jewelry box. The same one Nathan once gave me for our 5th anniversary, lined with red velvet, now lined with something far more dangerous. Meanwhile, life blossomed in unexpected places. The gallery owner, Marcello, became something like a friend. He'd spotted me in a quiet cafe one afternoon, hunched over a napkin sketch of a girl on a swing. He'd leaned over, curious, then asked if I had more. I showed him a handful of pieces from my car, nervous, half apologizing for their rawness. He smiled. That's exactly why they matter. He offered me a spot in an upcoming community show. Don't think of it as a debut, he said. Think of it as a declaration. I taught art classes in the mornings at a local children's center. The kids were wild and sweet, paint in their hair, stories tumbling from their mouths. They didn't know my past. They only knew I made them laugh when I pretended to eat the crayons. They gave me something I hadn't had in years, joy without condition. My world was still quiet, still rebuilding, but no longer hollow. The walls of the guest house felt warmer now. I filled them with my work, my scent, myself. The eucalyptus still curled through the air at night, mingling with the salty breeze and a perfume I had once loved but stopped wearing. The one Nathan had claimed gave him a headache. I wore it now. Boldly. The invitation was printed on thick cream cardstock with gold lettering. You are cordially invited, The Woman in Red, a collection by E.M. Green. Thursday at 6 p.m., Monarch Gallery, Ocean View. Lane no signature, no note, just the invitation. I mailed one to Nathan's office, another to her. I didn't know if they would come. I didn't care. This wasn't for revenge. This was a mirror held up to their lives. Let them see it. Let them flinch if they must. The day of the show, I wore red. Not the soft maroon of old sweaters, or the muted wine of polite lipstick. No, this was red. A slinky, high-neck gown that fit like skin and bled confidence down every seam. I'd found it in a vintage shop the week before and thought, she would have been afraid to wear this. I'm not. Not anymore. The gallery buzzed, softly with wine glasses, murmurs, and the creak of old wood under hesitant feet. I stood near the center, close enough to watch them come in. If they came. People drifted past my paintings with reverence. Some whispered, some cried. When they reached her, the woman in red, most stood still. A few brought their hands to their hearts. I stood quietly, letting the art speak, letting her speak. And then, at exactly 6:47 p.m., they walked in. Nathan wore his usual tailored arrogance, charcoal suit, rolled cuff, jaw tight. He scanned the room with narrowed eyes and paused when he saw me. She followed a step behind. Younger, taller than I remembered, wearing a black sheath dress and insecurity masked in makeup. They stopped in, front of the woman in red. Nathan's brows furrowed, her lips parted, and I watched it register, first in her, then in him. The color, the scarf, the story. I stepped beside them, unannounced. Beautiful, isn't she? I said gently. Her hand trembled. Nathan's jaw clenched. This is a stunt. No, I replied, voice calm. This is truth. From my purse I withdrew a single envelope. Inside, a neatly printed list of exhibits, expenses, emails, and a USB. I pressed it into his palm. Consider this my closing piece. You'll want to review it before Monday. The board meets at 10. He tried to speak, but I turned away. A woman, approached me seconds later, mistaking me for a stranger. "That one," she said, nodding to the painting. "She survived something. You can feel it," I smiled. "Yes, she has." That night, after the last guest had left, I walked through the gallery alone. Each painting now felt like a chapter closed, a wound kissed, a truth honored. I paused one last time in front of the woman in red. I whispered, "Thank you," and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The gallery was full that night, swirling with laughter, murmurs, the clink of wine glasses. Strangers stood in front of my paintings, eyes wide, hearts open, some wiping away quiet tears. Marcello had said it was my night to shine, but it felt more like my night to be seen for who I was. All the rawness I'd hidden behind walls of silence now danced freely in the open. I wore red. Not to strike a blow, not to make a statement, but to reclaim what I'd lost. To reclaim me. The scarlet gown wrapped around my body like an embrace, every inch of it a defiant whisper against the woman I had once been. The woman too small, too afraid. That night, I was anything but small. Anything but afraid. My heels clicked softly against the polished wood, a rhythm that kept time with the steady pulse in my veins. I was not going to run. Not anymore. But there, standing in the middle of my world, surrounded by my truth, I felt the air grow still. I didn't see him at first. Nathan. But I knew. I could feel him, like a storm on the horizon, his presence tugging at the air. And then I saw her, taller than I remembered, elegant in a cold, practiced way. She stood next to him, mouth twitching into a smile that felt more like a sneer than anything else. He glanced around, looking for an escape route, a path to avoid the truth that hung heavy in the room, but there was nowhere left to hide. I stood by the wedding ring, the final piece of the exhibit. I had poured everything into it. Hours, days, weeks. It was a multi-layered creation, fragments of fabric that once belonged to my wedding dress, scraps of metal that I'd melted and twisted, pieces of my own heart, the remnants of the love I had once given so freely. The wedding ring, his ring, was encased in the middle, battered and imperfect, the diamond dull and tarnished under the dim light. It told a story without words. The words had already been spoken. What remained was the wreckage of a life I'd built, of a love I'd trusted. Nathan's eyes locked on it, and for the first time, he saw. He saw the mess he'd made of me, of us. He saw the timeline laid out like a broken map, my world fragmented, in brushstrokes. He saw her, the woman who had taken the life he promised me, who had taken pieces of me I couldn't get back. For a moment, the room seemed to fade away. The hum of conversation stopped. It was just Nathan and me. His face reddened, his jaw clenched, but his gaze never left the exhibit. He walked slowly, steps heavy, toward the painting that told it all. I stayed still, rooted to the ground, letting the truth unfold in front of him, letting him unravel in the same way he had unraveled me. "You think this is funny?" He spat, his voice rising, cracking with frustration. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. He wasn't speaking to me anymore. He was speaking to himself, speaking to the walls closing in on him, to the realization that he'd been exposed in the most public, painful way, that every lie he'd spun had finally caught up with him. I could see the rage in his eyes. It was almost too much to bear. But for me, it was nothing more than a release. He stopped, eyes flickering to the silent loop of video playing on the projector screen next to the artwork. The camera had caught him, long after hours, in the company of her, tangled together at the desk they used to share. A glance at his phone, a secret smile, a whisper of a kiss. The proof was there, suspended in the air between us. And it made him stumble backward. He couldn't avoid it anymore. The video looped again. Her face, his face, their voices, their secrets, all of it unspooling on the screen like an endless thread. Nathan's hand shot out, grabbing the nearest glass of wine. He flung it across the room, shattering it against the wall. The crowd jumped back, startled, some gasping. But I wasn't surprised. He had always been a man of action, not words. His face twisted in fury as he turned to me. "You think this matters?" His voice was shaking now, as if the ground beneath him was crumbling. "You really think people are going to believe you over me?" I took a slow step forward, my red dress sweeping over the floor. A quiet, deliberate movement. I could feel the eyes of the room on me. People had stopped talking. They were waiting, watching, as the pieces of his life fell apart. "I don't need them to believe me, Nathan," I said softly. "The truth is already here." I turned my gaze to the painting, to the wreckage of what used to be our love. The wedding ring, shattered, unpolished, scarred. His eyes followed mine, but this time, there was no denying it. This time, there was nothing to say. The crowd had dispersed by the time I walked out of the gallery that night. The lights outside were dimmed. The street quiet, except for the sound of the ocean crashing against the rocks in the distance. The salt air clung to my skin, and I inhaled deeply, letting the cool breeze settle my nerves. As I walked back to the small apartment by the sea, I couldn't help but smile to myself. The silence of the night felt like a victory, not because of what I had done, but because of who I had become. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Marcello. The firm had launched an investigation into Nathan's financial activities, and the board was meeting to discuss his future. The video, the one I'd anonymously slipped into his office, had been the final nail in the coffin. His reputation crumbled almost overnight. I couldn't help but wonder where she was now, the woman in red. She had disappeared from his side just as quickly as she had arrived. The mistress, the secret, the lie. Gone. I spent the next few weeks in the gallery, watching as my life slowly turned into something else. People spoke my name with respect now. Artists, students, strangers. They came to see the woman who had risen, who had survived. In my little guest house by the sea, I painted. I taught. I laughed without guilt. And when I passed a mirror, I didn't look away. One evening, I stood in front of the ocean, the wind pulling at my hair. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crumpled photograph, a picture of the two of us, back when everything was still new, still pure. I didn't know why I had kept it, but now I did. It was just a moment, one fleeting moment in time. It didn't define me. It never had. I smiled softly as I let it slip from my fingers, watching it flutter away in the wind. The ocean swallowed it whole, and for the first time in years I was free.